My child had a wedding, and I learned about it only from the images posted online. I emptied her property and... My phone slipped from my hand and hit the linoleum with a dull smack, but I hardly heard it. The screen was still lit when I picked it up, showing the picture that had knocked the air from my lungs. My daughter Hope stood in a simple white wedding dress, her arm looped through the arm of a man I barely knew. Both of them were smiling in front of a small chapel I'd never seen. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. I pressed the call before I could think. It rang once, twice, then connected. Hope, did you get married? I asked, my voice dry. Yeah, Mama, she answered, casually as if I'd asked if she'd eaten lunch. Yesterday. Behind her words I heard cars passing, shoes on pavement, people talking. I didn't hear joy. I didn't hear excitement. I didn't hear my name. Why didn't you tell me? I was forced out. Why wasn't I there? It was just a small thing, Mama, she said. Only family. Only family. That phrase hit harder than the phone hitting the floor. I stared at the frozen smiles on my screen, at the caption underneath. Our special day. Family complete. My name wasn't tagged. My face wasn't in the frame. My phone didn't hold a missed call or a text warning me about this special day. I had learned about my own child's wedding the same way strangers did, scrolling on a phone in a quiet kitchen. My name is Clara May Harrison. I am 67 years old, and for most of those years I have believed that family was the center of the world. I buried my husband, Elijah, when our daughter was 9, and after that it was just us. I cleaned houses for the Rodwells in Buckhead by day and for the Millers in Sandy Springs by night. I washed their dishes, polished their silver, and scrubbed their bathtubs so my girl could have school supplies, new shoes, and dreams bigger than mine. When Hope was 5 and came down with pneumonia, I nursed her at our cramped kitchen table and on the worn couch, measuring out cough syrup and fever medicine I could barely afford. I worked full days at the Rodwells, then sat up through the night with a cool cloth on her forehead, praying those rattling coughs would quiet. On the day her fever finally broke, she clung to my neck and whispered, Mama, when I get married, you're gonna be next to me, okay? The prettiest lady there. That promise lived in my heart for over 20 years. When she turned 16, I gave her a party I had no business paying for. I sold my wedding band, took extra shifts, cooked for church bazaars. We rented a small hall with wood floors and twinkle lights. I fried chicken and made pans of macaroni and cheese, peach cobbler, and sweet tea enough for everyone. We danced until our feet ached. At the end of the night, she hugged me and said, You're the best mama in the world. I'll never forget this. I thought that meant something permanent. Sitting in my kitchen in Atlanta, my coffee growing cold in my hand, that Facebook photo made all those memories twist like a knife. In the picture beside my daughter stood her new husband, Devon Hayes. Behind them, with proud smiles, stood Franklin and Eleanor Hayes, his parents, looking every inch like a family on a holiday card. The caption thanked our families for making the day perfect. Our families. As if I were dead. As if I were an old neighbor and not the woman who had washed floors until her knees throbbed so that girl could go to college and walk across a graduation stage. I called Hope 3 times that day. Every call went straight to voicemail. I sent little messages pretending I hadn't seen the post. Just checking on you, baby. You okay? Need anything? Hours later, she finally answered with a short text. I'm fine, Mama. We'll talk later. Later. That night, I stared at the ceiling above my bed and realized something I'd never let myself think. I had built my entire life around a child who now treated me like a distant acquaintance. In the heavy quiet of that early morning, I felt something inside me shift. A different version of Clara May opened her eyes, one that was tired of begging for a place in her own daughter's life. In the days that followed, memories came at me like waves, dragging me back and forth. I went through the old trunk at the foot of my bed, the one that had belonged to my mother. Inside were birth certificates, shot records, school photos, and report cards lined up like proof that I had done my job. Hope's handwriting changed across the years on art projects and little notes, from clumsy block letters to careful teenage script. I found a photograph from her church confirmation when she was 8. She stood in a white dress I'd made especially for that day, her hair braided neat, a small cross around her neck. In the picture, she had her arms wrapped tight around my waist, cheek pressed to my shoulder. We were both grinning at the camera as if the whole world belonged to us. I remembered her whispering, "Mama, when I have big parties, you're always going to be there, okay? You're my favorite person." I found another picture from her 16th birthday. We stood in the middle of the hall, dancing slow to a song she had chosen as ours, the same lullaby I used to hum when she was sick. She'd begged the DJ to play it just for us. That night she told me, "I want everyone to see how much I love you." Looking at those photos now, my eyes wet and my hands shaking, I wondered when that girl disappeared. The shift started in college. Hope had earned a scholarship to study business administration, and I was determined that money would never be an excuse for her to give up. I added extra hours at the Rodwells, took catering work at weekend events, and sewed dresses for ladies in the neighborhood. When she came home between classes, we still laughed and talked. But slowly, the stories about teachers and friends started to quiet, replaced with phrases like group project and networking event. Then she met Devon. The first time she said his name, there was a new brightness in her voice. She talked about him endlessly, how smart he was, the firm where he interned, the neighborhood he'd grown up in. She described his parents, too. Proper. Educated. "They're really good people, Mama," she said. "They have standards." When she brought Devon to our house for dinner, I cooked enough food to feed an army. Baked macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, collard greens, candied yams, cornbread, banana pudding, and a pitcher of sweet tea sweating on the counter. I set the table with my best dishes, the mismatched but cherished set I'd collected from thrift stores over the years. Devon was polite and well-mannered. He shook my hand, called me Mrs. Harrison, and complimented the food. But as we ate, I watched his eyes wander, taking in the small living room, the old couch with its mended seams, the faded curtains I hadn't yet had time to replace. I couldn't read the expression, but it made my skin prickle. Hope seemed tense, talking faster than usual, smoothing over every gap in conversation. "Your house is really nice," he said as he stood to leave, his tone soft but distant, like he was praising a child's drawing. That night, Hope scolded me gently, her voice sharpened by embarrassment. "Mama, you asked so many questions about his parents and his job. Not everybody shares everything at once like we do. You can come off intense." That was the first time I felt like I was being handled instead of loved. After that, Devon visited less often. When he did, our talks were shallow. Weather, sports, work. Hope spent more weekends at his place. Family dinners on Sundays became maybe next time, then we'll see, then nothing at all. The phrase, "Devon and I have plans," replaced our old routines. When Hope graduated, I cried through the entire ceremony. I watched her cross the stage in her cap and gown and thought, we did it. We made it. Afterwards, she invited me to a restaurant in Decatur to celebrate. Devon's parents, Franklin and Eleanor, joined us. They spoke easily about trips to Europe, nice hotels, and favorite Broadway plays. I tried to follow along, laughing when they laughed, smiling when there was a pause. When someone asked about my work, I told the truth. I cleaned houses, ironed shirts, and sometimes catered small events. The conversation stalled for half a second. Hope quickly jumped in to shift the topic, describing an upcoming project at work. That night, back at home, she said carefully, "Mama, I know you're proud of what you do, but sometimes people misunderstand. Devon's parents are refined. They're not used to certain things." Refined. The word sat in my chest like a stone. Apparently, love, sacrifice, and loyalty weren't refined. They didn't count in the world Devon's family lived in. Over the next year, Hope and Devon rented a nice apartment in a newer part of Atlanta. I loved seeing my daughter build a life, But each visit made me feel like I had to knock on a door to a club I hadn't joined. "Call first, Mama," she said. "We're so busy. We don't want you to come all this way for nothing." I understood, but the days when I could just stop by with a pot of stew or a bag of groceries were gone. When she mentioned weddings, it was always vague. "We want something simple. We're still thinking. We haven't set a date." I had a folder under my bed full of little cutout pictures, flower ideas, dresses, church aisles. I imagined shopping with her, fastening tiny buttons on her gown, straightening her veil. Instead, on a random Tuesday morning, I drank coffee and nibbled on a pecan Danish while I scrolled past baby pictures and vacation selfies from neighbors and cousins. Then that picture appeared. The white dress. The chapel I hadn't set foot in. Devon's parents beaming. The words, "finally married." Those two words tore open every quiet fear I'd been ignoring. It wasn't that she had forgotten to invite me. It was that she had chosen not to. When she and Devon came by after their honeymoon, they brought a bag of souvenirs from Cabo. Candies, a t-shirt, a little ashtray with a palm tree painted on it. Hope sat in my living room, smelling of ocean lotion and expensive perfume, and chatted about the cliffs and the resort and the food. "How was the ceremony?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "It was perfect," she said. "Very small. Just the two of us and his parents. Super intimate. You know I don't like big events." I remembered her sweet 16 party, her dancing, her laughter, the way she'd begged for a big celebration, and bit back a bitter laugh. She might not like big events anymore, but the problem wasn't size. It was me. They stayed 2 hours. When they left, their promises to get together soon floated in the air like steam from a kettle that had already boiled dry. After the door closed, I looked at the trinkets spread across my coffee table and felt something inside of me harden. For the first time since I'd become a mother, I let myself think, maybe I don't want to keep living like this. The next morning, the world looked ordinary. The same pale light sliding over the sink, the same chipped mug, the same humming refrigerator. But inside me, something was different. The sadness had not softened, but it had changed shape. It wasn't just pain now. It was resolved. I sat at the kitchen table with an old spiral notebook I used to use for Hope's appointments and school events. On a fresh page, in shaky but clear handwriting, I wrote, "Plan for Independence, Clara May Harrison. August 12, 2024. I wasn't writing notes for someone else this time. I was writing for myself. First, I listed my resources. Over decades of wiping counters and polishing floors, I had saved more than I'd ever admitted out loud. I owned my small house clear and free in a neighborhood that had quietly become valuable. I had a modest retirement account, savings from my main jobs, and something else Hope didn't know about, a separate bank account I'd opened when she turned 18. 4 years, I'd stashed away extra money there from sewing jobs and weekend catering. My plan had been to surprise her on her wedding day, to say, "Here, baby. This is so you can start your married life without debt." I had held on to that secret like a wrapped gift. Now, staring at the notebook, I knew that gift wouldn't be handed over the way I'd imagined. Next, I wrote, "Find a place that is mine." I had spent most of my life in a house that was full of Hope. Her school projects still taped inside closets, her trophies on the dresser in her old room, her pictures on every shelf. That home had held us through storms, but it had also become a waiting room. Every ring of the phone made me jump. Every holiday made me hope for an invitation that might not come. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had told me about her sister who'd moved into a community for older adults in Decatur. "She says it's the best thing she ever did," Mrs. Rodriguez had said more than once. Friends, activities, trips. She told me she finally feels free. Back then, I'd thought, that sounds like something people do when they have no family. Now, I understand better. Sometimes people did it when they were done begging family to see them. The third point I wrote down hurt the most. Step away slowly. I knew if I vanished without a word, it would turn into a story about how difficult I was. I'd be blamed for the drama, for not talking things through. I didn't want a scene. I wanted a quiet exit. That Sunday, instead of going straight to church, I stopped by the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Lawson, had known me for years. He was used to me coming in to deposit small amounts of cash, always asking about fees and saying, "I'd just like to have something aside in case Hope needs help." "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison," he greeted me. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I said, and for once I meant it in a new way. "I'd like to review all my accounts. I'm thinking about making some changes." We sat in his glass office while he pulled up my records. Seeing my life's work reduced to numbers and lines was strange, but also quietly satisfying. He looked impressed. "You've been very disciplined," he said. "You're in a stable position." For years, I'd thought of myself as someone who barely scraped by. Seeing the full picture, I realized that years of going without new shoes and fancy vacations had built something solid for me, not just for my child. From the bank, I went to Decatur. The community was called the Legacy at Peachtree. As I walked toward the entrance, I saw flower beds in full bloom, benches in the shade, and older residents strolling or chatting. The receptionist, Patricia, greeted me warmly when I explained why I was there. "We have a couple of one-bedroom units open," she said. "You're welcome to take a tour." We walked through bright hallways, past a library, a small chapel, a dining hall that smelled like home cooking, and activity rooms full of yarn, board games, and craft supplies. The apartment she showed me was modest but spotless: a living area, a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a balcony facing a garden. On a bench below, 3 residents were laughing over something one of them had said. No one looked rushed. No one looked like they were waiting for a text. "We do yoga, knitting, movies, outings," Patricia explained. "Most people come here after a loss or some kind of family strain. At first they're sad. Then one day they realize they've built a whole world for themselves here." I stood in that small apartment and imagined my coffee cup on the counter, my old quilt on the bed, my Bible on the nightstand. I imagined waking without wondering if my daughter would call that day. "I'd like this one," I heard myself say. "The one with the balcony." Patricia blinked, then smiled. "Wonderful. If you bring your documents this week, we can get you moved in within a couple of weeks." Back in my old kitchen that afternoon, I spread out my papers: birth certificate, house deed, bank statements, and felt something I hadn't felt since my 20s. The sense that my life didn't have to be over just because my daughter had chosen another path. On Monday, I visited a lawyer, Mr. Sanders, to organize my will. I told him I wanted to divide my estate differently than I'd always planned. "I want half of what I own to go to organizations that support single mothers," I said. "Women who are getting up at 4 in the morning and doing everything they can with very little. The other half can go to Hope, but with one condition." "Which is?" he asked. "She has to write a letter explaining how she came to treat me the way she did. Not a performance. Not just sorry. A truthful explanation of her choices. She doesn't have to give it to me. She gives it to you. She can't access the inheritance until that letter exists." He watched me for a moment, then nodded. "You're not trying to punish her," he said quietly. "You're trying to give her a chance to face herself." "Yes," I said, "even if I'm not there to see it." In the days that followed, I sold or donated furniture, packed only what I truly loved, and carefully boxed up Hope's old things: medals, school books, some clothes. I rented a small storage unit near her side of town and had the boxes delivered there with her name on the contract. If she wanted those pieces of her past, they were hers to reclaim. If not, someday someone would open them and see that a mother once cherished every little thing her child left behind. Hope called me twice that week, chatting about her job and new dishes she'd bought, the dinners she'd had with Devon's family. I listened, asked polite questions, and kept my own plans quiet. For the first time, I had something of my own not centered around her. "Mama, you sound different," she said during one of those calls. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is finally getting there," I answered. "I'm just organizing my life." She offered to help. I smiled into the receiver. Thank you, baby. But I've got it. It felt good to mean it. The move happened on a bright Monday morning. Movers loaded the few pieces of furniture I'd chosen to keep. The little round dining table, my favorite armchair, my bed. I walked through each room of the house one last time. The kitchen where I'd packed countless school lunches. The living room where we'd watched cartoons and cried over movies. Hope's old bedroom, now bare, the outline of posters still faintly visible on the wall. I put my hand on the doorframe and whispered, "Thank you. You did your job." Then I stepped outside and closed the door. By noon, I was standing in my new apartment at the Legacy at Peachtree. My quilt lay folded at the foot of my new bed. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor. The balcony doors stood open, letting in the sound of leaves rustling and someone laughing in the courtyard below. My first week there felt like waking up in a different version of my own life. I met neighbors who introduced themselves with their own names, not as someone's parent or grandparent. At meals, people asked about my favorite books and recipes, not just about my children. On Wednesday, I joined the knitting group and felt my hands remember the old rhythm of needle and thread, this time for no one's deadline but my own. On Thursday, I tried the beginner dance class. My steps were clumsy, but the instructor, Mr. Davis, grinned and said, "You're doing just fine, Ms. Clara. Around here the only rule is that you don't apologize for yourself." That night, after a dinner of meatloaf and mashed potatoes in the communal dining hall, I went back to my apartment, made a cup of tea, and stepped onto the balcony. The air was cool. The gardens glowed softly under lamplight. My phone rang, buzzing in my hand. It was Hope. "Mama, where are you?" she asked the moment I picked up. Her voice sounded panicked. "I went by the house and it's empty. The neighbors say you moved. What is going on?" I heard the teenager in her voice, the child who once cried when she thought she'd lost me in a crowd. For a second, the old version of me wanted to say, "I'm right here, baby. Don't worry." But I thought of that wedding photo, of all the times I'd sat alone on holidays, and I held my ground. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I moved somewhere that suits me better now." "Better?" Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask?" "Because I've spent most of my life asking what works for you," I replied. This was a decision about my life. I didn't need permission to live it. Silence stretched between us. "Where are you living?" she finally asked. "In a community in Decatur. A place for older adults who want to live independently. I have my own apartment, friends, and activities." "A retirement home?" There was something like embarrassment in her tone. "It's a place where people my age choose to live with company instead of waiting alone for a phone that might not ring," I said. "I have a key, a schedule, and a life, Hope. All mine." "You sound different," she said. "I am different," I answered. "I finally understand that I'm allowed to be more than a supporting character in your story." After another pause, she asked quietly, "Is this because of the wedding?" The word hung there between us. Wedding. The event that should have been one of the proudest days of my life, but became the sharpest wound instead. "It's connected," I said. "Not just the wedding, but everything it revealed. When you chose to get married without telling me, you showed me exactly where I stood. I've just adjusted my position to match." "So you don't want to be in my life anymore?" Her voice shook. "I will always be your mother," I said gently. "That's not something a person can stop being. But I won't keep chasing a place you've made clear you don't want me to have. If we're going to have a relationship from now on, it has to be one where we treat each other like adults, with mutual respect and honesty. No more crumbs." We ended the call on uneasy but honest terms. I set the phone down and stared at the night sky, feeling both heartache and relief. For once, I'd told my truth without softening it to keep the peace. A few days later, Patricia from the front desk called up to say I had visitors. In the lounge, Hope and Devon sat side by side on a plush sofa. Hope's eyes were red-rimmed. Devon's jaw was tight. "Hi, Mama," Hope said, standing up. This place is nice. It is, I agreed. I like it here. Devon glanced around the high ceilings and clean floors. Must be expensive. I watched him, remembering all the nights I'd counted pennies while he and Hope ate at places that charged more for a salad than I spent on a week's worth of groceries. I can afford it, I said, meeting his gaze. Turns out years of careful saving add up. I spent most of my life holding money aside in case you two needed help. Now I've decided to spend it on myself while I can still enjoy it. Hope shifted in her seat. We're just worried, Mama. We don't want you to run out. You don't need to worry, I replied. You've shown me that you can make big decisions without including me. I'm capable of doing the same. The hurt flickered across her face. Are you very mad at me? She asked. I'm not consumed by anger, I said. I'm disappointed. I'm grieving. And I'm at peace with finally seeing things clearly. How do we fix this? Devon asked, surprising me. We didn't think it would hurt you this much. You didn't think about me much at all, I answered, not unkindly. That's really the problem. Hope started to cry, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Do you still love me? She whispered. Of course I do, I said. Love doesn't switch off. But love isn't the same as allowing someone to treat you however they want. I finally learned that loving my child doesn't mean sacrificing my own dignity. What do you want from us? Devon asked. It was the first honest question he'd ever asked me. I want consistency, I said. If you say I'm family, treat me like it. Not only when it's convenient or looks good in a picture. Invite me to the joys and not only to the cleanup. Include me in decisions that matter, or don't be surprised when I stop planning my life around yours. We talked for a while longer. There were no dramatic apologies, no grand promises. When they left, I watched them walk out through the glass doors and felt strangely calm. I didn't know if things would ever fully mend. But for the first time, they had seen me draw a line and watched me refuse to erase it. That evening, as I ate with my new friends in the dining hall, someone asked if everything was okay. Yes, I said, scooping mashed potatoes onto my plate. For the first time in a long while. Yes, it is. 6 months passed. Seasons shifted around the gardens at the Legacy at Peachtree. The flowers changed, the light changed, but my routine settled into something steady and gentle. I woke when I wanted, brewed coffee in my little kitchen, and stepped onto the balcony to watch the sun catch on the leaves. Some mornings I read my Bible. Some mornings I just breathed. My days filled themselves. Knitting on Wednesdays. Dancing on Thursdays. Movie nights. Trips to nearby small towns on weekends. New friends who remembered my stories and asked for more. In the chapel, people knew me as Clara, not as someone's mother. It was strange and beautiful to see for myself. Hope called occasionally, sometimes from her own number, sometimes from others. Sometimes I let it ring. Sometimes I answered. Our conversations were polite and cautious. I listened to her talk about promotions, travel, and plans with the Hayes family. I shared a little about my classes, my new friends, and my plants. I guarded the quiet I'd earned. One afternoon, a letter arrived in a stiff envelope, the kind lawyers use. My name was written in careful type on the front. Inside was a document from Mr. Sanders, my attorney, and a letter from Hope. She'd typed it. In it, she explained why she hadn't invited me to the wedding. She wrote about wanting it to be simple, about the Hayes family's preference for a small ceremony, about concerns that I might feel out of place. She used phrases like, we didn't want drama, and we assumed you'd understand. Reading it, I realized she still saw my feelings as an inconvenience, a glitch to manage, not a wound to tend. There was no real acknowledgement that she had broken something that might never fully heal. No true understanding of the years of sacrifice behind the woman she'd quietly pushed out of her life's biggest moment. It read less like a confession and more like a justification for a business decision. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it into the wooden box where I kept old photos and a few precious letters from the girl she once had been. Not to curse her with it, not to hold it over her head, just to let it exist without giving it power over my day. My love for her hadn't disappeared. It had transformed. I no longer loved her with the desperate love that begged to be chosen. I loved her with the kind of love that understands that sometimes, for your own survival, you have to step back from someone you would have given your life for. One evening, after community dinner, my friend Mercedes asked, "Do you ever regret leaving that house? Leaving that old life?" I thought about the empty kitchen I'd walked away from, the voicemail box full of short messages from Hope, the ache of sitting alone on holidays waiting to see if I'd be invited anywhere. "I miss the daughter I thought I had," I said quietly. "But I don't miss the way I was living." That life was slowly shrinking me down until I hardly recognized myself. The truth surprised even me with its clarity. In the grocery store a few days later, a woman from my old neighborhood recognized me. "Clara. Haven't seen you in ages. Your daughter's been asking around, offering money if anyone can tell her where you are." I smiled and placed a loaf of bread in my cart. "Sometimes people only start looking when they realize a door has closed," I replied. "If we're meant to find each other again, we will. On different terms." At night, I sometimes thought of Hope. Not the adult woman with careful letters and polished pictures, but the little girl who used to curl up at my side and fall asleep to the sound of my voice. I prayed for her. I asked God to keep her safe, to soften whatever had hardened inside her, to help her understand that a parent's heart is not a doormat. But I did not pray for things to go back to the way they were. I had learned too much to return there. Most mornings, as the sun lifted over Decatur and the breeze stirred the curtains, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace that didn't depend on anybody's approval, attention, or invitation. My life wasn't perfect. My heart still carried scars. But I was whole in a way I had never been when everything I did revolved around someone else's schedule. To women like me, women who have given everything and then been told, silently or loudly, that they are no longer needed, I would say this: your worth isn't measured by how much you can endure. You have the right to be treated with care. You have the right to step back from people who keep hurting you, even if you gave birth to them. You have the right to start over at 60, 70, or 80 if that's what it takes to find your own smile again. The greatest freedom I've found wasn't in disappearing from my daughter's life. It was finally appearing on my own. Now, when I sit on my balcony and the fountain in the garden babbles and the bougainvillea sways in the breeze, I feel something simple and strong settle in my chest. Gratitude. For years I did my best. For the courage to walk away. For the ordinary quiet joy of a day that belongs to me. And that, more than any wedding invitation or social media caption, is what makes my family complete. If you are connected with Clara May's journey, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments. Your messages and encouragement help keep these life stories going. If you'd like to support the channel so I can keep sharing more, you can use the thanks button below the video. On the screen, you'll see 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. With respect and warmth, until the next life story.